So when you're using mixed methods, really the main thing you're doing and the main thing you need to think about before you go in there is to really stop and reflect on the different design approaches that we've discussed and the strengths and disadvantages of each, because only in doing so would you really be able to not just think about how to structure mixed methods design, but really how to structure the best design given your research question. And that's really one of the main purposes of understanding research design and how to develop a research. So you want to always think about the problem and how what type of design lends itself to that problem. That may have to do with the people affected, the way they're affected, of course, resources and time, what you know about it. If you really don't know much about an issue, that will lend itself to qualitative, for example, over quantitative. Maybe philosophically, you have a vested interest in community-based participatory research, for example, or specific feminist approaches that require you to integrate certain qualitative aspects. And maybe just the general goals of the research. If your goal is to find the cause that leads to an issue, then you're probably going to lean towards quantitative. So think through kind of these summaries that I've provided here in the next few slides. For example, in true experiments, a lot of people think of this as the gold standard, and a lot of researchers will definitely try to help you or make you influence you to think that this is the best one. And again, for causal, if you're trying to find the cause of something, it is definitely stronger, but realistically, it is so difficult to do that in a real world with real people. And because there's so many things you have to control, it becomes really hard to say that even if you find something, you could say, for example, that domestic violence may cause trauma in a relationship, but you may not really be able to generalize it to everybody that experiences domestic violence. In single subject designs, which we looked at previously, this is really useful in agencies and for practitioners to do. It doesn't require a ton of resources. Again, it's difficult to generalize, and you can only really use it for certain questions. Now, surveys are definitely one of the most popular ones. You can include a lot of different questions, a lot of different variables, do a lot of statistics. But again, you can only measure what they're willing to report. And so if people don't want to answer, you can't measure it, or you have to take into account the questions they don't answer and how that impacts. In other words, you're left with a lot of holes. You can't ever guarantee that you really captured everything you needed to capture. And of course, qualitative studies. These are great at exploring in-depth attachment, really looking at people's perspectives, giving voices to people that may have previously been not really able to participate in research. But again, you can't really get a lot of cases, lots of time, and it's not a good approach if you have a specific relationship between two variables that you want to test. So think through, again, as you're thinking about your research questions and the different ways to approach them, does your research question lend itself to a mixed method design? If so, how does that look? And if not, what are the different types of research methods that you may think about even in the future could be used to answer your current research question or some of the other ones that you haven't been able to address just yet? There's also something called a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis, you're looking at relationships really broadly. So a lot of the times when you're looking at articles, these are sometimes called systematic reviews. And basically, this is a study of studies. So you'll find that multiple studies will be included as the subjects, and it can be kind of tricky when you're reading about these. So make sure you know how to distinguish those from just regular studies. The alternate to that is the metasynthesis, which is focused on qualitative studies. So here you're not just combining them, but you're reinterpreting that qualitative data. When you're doing those, then you have to be pretty systematic. So just like you would have specific criteria for your subjects, in a regular study, you might say, I'm only going to include women, ages 18 and up, in this community. Well, if you're doing a meta-analysis or a meta-synthesis, you also have to say, I only want to include those that included, this type of maybe only adults, or maybe they only looked, or people that studies that looked at domestic violence, or only qualitative or quantitative, or only certain cultures or certain languages. So there's a lots of things that you would still have to define for these types of studies. Think through just some of the criteria that you would want to include. So if you're doing a meta-analysis, then you're going to have to be very, very explicit. It's not just a literature review, and that's what a lot of people get confused about. You have to still use a methodology, and that you're specifying criteria for who do you include. You have specific strategies of how you search in the databases. You have to document those. How do you screen literature? So the same way that you would be very systematic about a regular study, you have to be just as systematic in a meta-analysis. Meta-analysis, sometimes when you have a lot of studies that keep answering the same research question, for example, does cognitive behavioral therapy work with certain populations? It's really helpful because it keeps you as a practitioner from having to read, potentially hundreds of articles, and it really synthesizes it for you and brings it down. So it's really helpful. If you're looking at this from a practical perspective, you definitely want to keep an eye out for those articles, for those research questions where there has been a lot of studies already done.